The orphaned boy took refuge in a giant sewer beneath the city. Then a voice called his name. Samuel was 9 years old when Director Martinez sold him to the textile factory. There was no warning, no explanation. Just a man in a cheap gray suit who appeared one morning at the Santa Teresa orphanage, spoke quietly with the director in her office, and left an envelope of cash on her desk. That afternoon, Samuel was told to pack his few belongings into a plastic bag. The other children watched in silence as he was led to a windowless white van parked in the back alley. He had seen this happen before. 3 times in the past year, children had been taken away under promises of good families and better opportunities. None of them ever came back. The drive lasted 2 hours. Samuel sat on a metal bench in the back of the van, unable to see outside, listening to the engines rumble and the muffled sounds of the city fading into industrial noise. When the doors finally opened, he was standing in front of a massive concrete building with narrow windows covered in metal bars. Fábrica Textile San Miguel read the faded sign above the entrance. Inside, the air was thick with chemical fumes and cotton dust. The noise was overwhelming. Hundreds of sewing machines operating simultaneously, their mechanical rhythm punctuated by shouted orders and the hiss of steam presses. A short, muscular man with a scarred face grabbed Samuel by the shoulder. "You work at Station 47, he said. 12-hour shifts. 6 in the morning to 6 at night. You get 2 bathroom breaks and 20 minutes for lunch. Anyone caught slowing down gets punishment detail in the boiler room." Samuel was led through rows of industrial sewing machines where children of all ages sat hunched over their work. Some looked as young as 7. Others might have been teenagers, though it was hard to tell. Exhaustion had aged their faces beyond their years. His station was between a girl who couldn't have been older than 8 and a boy of about 12 who worked with mechanical precision, never looking up, never slowing down. "What's your name?" Samuel whispered to the girl during their first bathroom break. She looked at him with empty eyes. "Don't talk," she said. "Just work. If you talk, they hear. If they hear, you go to the basement." Samuel learned quickly what the basement meant. On his 3rd day, a boy at Station 62 collapsed from exhaustion. The guards dragged him away while everyone else continued working as if nothing had happened. The boy returned 2 days later with burn marks on his arms and a limp that never went away. The children slept in a converted warehouse adjacent to the factory. Metal bunk beds were packed so tightly together that there was barely room to walk between them. The air smelled of sweat, dirty clothes, and chemical residue that clung to their skin no matter how much they washed. Meals were served in a cafeteria with long metal tables and benches. Watery bean soup, stale tortillas, occasionally a piece of chicken so small it was barely worth fighting over. Samuel learned the unwritten rules of survival. Never make eye contact with the guards. Never complain about pain or exhaustion. Never ask questions about what happened to children who disappeared. Work fast enough to avoid punishment, but not so fast that they increased your quota. The days blurred together into an endless cycle of mechanical repetition. Wake at 5. Work until 6. Eat. Sleep. Wake at 5. Work until 6. Eat. Sleep. After 3 weeks, Samuel had almost forgotten what it felt like to be anything other than exhausted. It was on a Tuesday, or maybe Wednesday, time had lost meaning, when Samuel's life changed again. He was assigned to fetch thread spools from the basement storage room. The basement was a place most children feared. It was where punishment happened, where children were sent to work in temperatures so hot that some fainted within minutes, where the oldest, most dangerous machinery operated without safety guards. But Samuel's supervisor that day was distracted by an argument with another guard, so he simply pointed toward the stairs and told Samuel to hurry. The basement was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights that hummed and buzzed like dying insects. Samuel moved quickly through narrow corridors lined with industrial shelving units, searching for the specific thread color he'd been sent to retrieve. It was while reaching for a spool on a high shelf that he heard something unusual. A draft of cool air, completely different from the oppressive heat of the basement. He followed the sensation to a corner where old wooden crates were stacked against the wall. The crates looked like they hadn't been moved in years, covered in dust, spiderwebs thick enough to obscure what was behind them. Samuel pushed one crate aside, then another. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Behind the crates was a rusted metal grate set into the concrete floor. It was at least 3 feet across, held in place by corroded bolts that crumbled when Samuel touched them. He knelt down and peered through the grate. Darkness, but also the sound of moving water, and air that was cool and damp and smelled like earth instead of chemicals. Samuel knew he had minutes at most before someone came looking for him. He worked frantically to loosen the grate, his small fingers gripping the metal bars and pulling with all his strength. The grate came free with a screech of rusted metal. Below was a hole dropping into blackness, with metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall forming a ladder descending into the unknown. Samuel didn't hesitate. He climbed down into the darkness, pulling the grate back into place above him as best he could from below. The ladder descended about 20 feet before his feet touched something solid. When his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized he was standing in a tunnel. Not a sewer pipe, a tunnel. It was enormous, at least 15 feet wide and 12 feet tall, with curved concrete walls that extended in both directions farther than he could see. A channel of dark water about 4 feet wide ran down the center, moving slowly but steadily. On either side were raised walkways just wide enough for a person to walk comfortably. Samuel stood there for several minutes, listening. Above him, muffled by concrete and distance, he could hear the factory machinery. But down here, the only sounds were water and his own breathing. He was exhausted. His legs ached. His fingers were bleeding from the rusted metal. But for the first time in 3 weeks, he wasn't being watched. He started walking. The tunnel stretched on seemingly forever, curving gently to the left, then straightening out again. Occasionally, smaller pipes branched off in different directions, but Samuel stayed in the main tunnel, following the flow of water. He had no idea where he was going. He had no plan beyond getting as far from the factory as possible. After what felt like hours, but might have been only 30 minutes, Samuel's exhaustion became unbearable. His vision was blurring. His legs were trembling. He needed to rest, even if only for a few minutes. That was when he noticed the opening. On the left side of the tunnel, about chest high, was a dark, rectangular gap in the wall. Samuel climbed up carefully and found himself in a smaller side chamber, raised about 6 feet above the main tunnel floor. The chamber was dry. The air was stale but breathable. And most importantly, it was hidden from anyone walking through the main tunnel. Samuel collapsed onto the concrete floor and closed his eyes, telling himself he would rest for just a few minutes before continuing. He woke to complete darkness and the terrifying realization that he had no idea how long he'd been asleep. His body screamed in protest as he sat up. Every muscle ached. His throat was dry. His stomach cramped with hunger. But he was alone. He was hidden. And for the first time since being taken from the orphanage, no one was telling him what to do. Samuel spent the next few hours, or maybe it was a full day, time was impossible to measure in the constant darkness, exploring his immediate surroundings by touch. The chamber was roughly rectangular, about 10 feet deep and 8 feet wide. The floor was concrete. The walls were smooth except for occasional metal brackets that might have once held pipes or electrical conduits. And in the back corner, his searching hands found something that made his heart race. Objects. A wool blanket, damp but intact. Several empty tin cans. A plastic water bottle, also empty. And something that felt like a notebook, its pages warped by moisture. Someone else had been here, recently enough that their belongings hadn't completely decayed. Samuel's mind raced through possibilities. Another escaped worker? A homeless person who knew about the tunnels? Someone who used this place as a hiding spot? The discovery was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant the tunnels were survivable. Terrifying because it meant he might not be alone down here. Over the following days, Samuel counted 4 sleep cycles, which he assumed meant 4 days. He established a careful routine. He ventured out into the main tunnel only when absolutely necessary, moving quietly and listening constantly for any sound that might indicate danger. He discovered that the water in the central channel, while not clean, was flowing and didn't smell as toxic as he'd feared. He drank it carefully, small sips at a time, and so far hadn't gotten sick. He found a section of tunnel where a broken pipe dripped relatively clean water from above. He positioned the plastic bottle beneath it and waited hours for it to fill. Hunger was the worst problem. He had nothing to eat, and the exhaustion from 3 weeks of factory work combined with days without food was making him weak and dizzy. On what he counted as his 5th day in the tunnels, Samuel forced himself to explore farther from his hiding chamber. The main tunnel continued for what felt like miles, occasionally branching into smaller passages. He marked his path by dragging his hand along the left wall, ensuring he could find his way back. He discovered junction points where multiple tunnels converged. He found chambers that looked like they'd once been pump stations or maintenance rooms. He passed under sections where metal gratings in the ceiling allowed faint daylight to filter down, giving him brief moments of orientation. And then he found the stairs, a metal staircase, rusted but still solid, ascending from the tunnel up through a vertical shaft. Samuel climbed carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. At the top was a heavy metal door, sealed but not locked. He pushed against it with all his remaining strength. The door opened into an abandoned subway station. Samuel stood in shock, looking at tile walls covered in faded advertisements from decades ago, wooden benches rotting beneath layers of dust, and ticket booths with shattered glass windows. This entire underground network had been built as part of a metro system that was never completed. He was standing in the ghost of a city's abandoned dream. Through a collapsed section of ceiling, he could see the sky, actual daylight. And more importantly, he realized he was nowhere near the factory. The buildings visible through the opening looked residential, not industrial. He had traveled miles underground without realizing it. But Samuel didn't leave the tunnels. Up there, he was still a fugitive. Factory guards would be looking for him. Police might be involved. He had no identification, no proof of who he was, and no adult who would believe his story about being sold into child labor. Down here, he was invisible. He returned to his hiding chamber with new knowledge and renewed determination. The tunnel system was vast. It connected to the city above through multiple access points. And if he was careful, he could survive down here indefinitely. He began to explore more systematically, mapping the tunnels in his mind, identifying safe routes and dangerous areas where the water ran faster or where sections of ceiling looked unstable. It was during one of these explorations, on what he counted as his 8th day underground, that everything changed. Samuel was investigating a side passage he hadn't explored before when he heard something that made him freeze. A voice, distant, echoing through the tunnels, calling his name, Samuel. The word drifted through the darkness like smoke, impossible to locate precisely, but unmistakably real. His first instinct was pure terror. They had found him. The factory guards had somehow tracked him into the tunnels. They were coming to take him back to the machines and the chemical fumes and the 12-hour shifts. He ran, back through the passages he knew, moving as quietly as possible despite his panic, heading toward his hidden chamber, where he could wait in silence until they gave up and left. But as he ran, he heard it again. Samuel, I know you're here. I'm not going to hurt you. The voice was young, not an adult, maybe a teenager. And it was coming from multiple directions at once, echoing through the tunnel network in ways that made it impossible to determine the source. Samuel reached his chamber and pressed himself into the back corner, breathing as quietly as possible, listening. Footsteps, approaching slowly, confidently. Someone who knew these tunnels well. Samuel, my name is Diego. I've been living down here for 3 years. I know you escaped from the factory. I know you're scared. But you don't have to be alone. Samuel's mind raced. How did this person know his name? How did they know about the factory? The footsteps stopped directly below his hiding chamber. "I can hear you breathing," the voice said gently. "I'm not with the factory. I'm not with the orphanage. I escaped from the same place you did. I've been living in these tunnels ever since. And I've been waiting for someone else to find their way down here." Silence. Samuel's heart pounded so loudly he was sure it would give away his location. "I'm going to leave some food and water at the bottom of this chamber," the voice continued. "Take it when you're ready. And when you're ready to talk, I'll be in the central hub, the place where 6 tunnels meet. You've probably passed through it. I'll wait there every evening. You can decide if you want to trust me or not." Samuel heard the sound of something being set down on concrete, then footsteps moving away, fading into the distance. He waited an entire hour before climbing down to investigate. At the base of the chamber was a cloth bag containing 3 cans of food, beans, peaches, and condensed milk, along with a bottle of clean water and a small LED flashlight. Tucked beneath the bag was a note written in careful handwriting on a piece of cardboard. "I know what it's like to be alone down here. You don't have to trust me yet. But you also don't have to do this by yourself. Diego." Samuel sat in the darkness, holding the flashlight, staring at the food. For 8 days, he had been completely alone, afraid, hungry, uncertain if he would survive another week. Now someone was offering help. But could he trust it? What if this was a trick? What if Diego worked for the factory and was trying to lure him out? But the food was real. The water was real. And the voice hadn't sounded threatening. It had sounded lonely. That night, Samuel opened one of the cans and ate slowly, savoring every bite. The beans were the most delicious thing he'd tasted in a month. And as he ate, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would find the central hub. He would meet Diego. And he would decide for himself whether this was rescue or trap. The next evening, Samuel used the LED flashlight to navigate to the central hub. It was exactly as Diego had described, a large circular chamber where 6 different tunnels converged. The ceiling arched high above, supported by massive concrete pillars. In the center of a chamber, someone had created a living space. There was a camping mat with blankets, a collection of food supplies organized in plastic containers, books and magazines stacked neatly in one corner, a small camping stove connected to a propane tank, and battery-powered lanterns that cast a warm, steady light across the space. Sitting on one of the blankets was a teenage boy. He looked about 16, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders, a thin frame that spoke of years of minimal nutrition, and eyes that were simultaneously old and kind. He wore layered clothing, multiple shirts, and a heavy jacket even though the tunnel temperature was moderate. When he saw Samuel emerge from one of the passages, he smiled but didn't stand up or make any sudden movements. "Samuel," he said, "I'm glad you came. You're braver than I was. It took me 2 weeks before I trusted anyone down here." Samuel stayed near the tunnel entrance, ready to run if necessary. "How do you know my name?" he asked. "I watch the factory," Diego said. "From the outside. I see the new children arrive. I hear the guards talking. Your name was mentioned a lot after you disappeared. They're still looking for you, but they think you ran into the city. They don't know about the tunnels. You said you escaped from the same factory?" Diego nodded slowly. 3 years ago. I was 13. They bought me from the orphanage, just like they bought you. I worked there for 2 months before I found a way out. I've been living down here ever since. Why didn't you go to the police?" Diego's expression darkened. "Because the police already know. The factory pays them to look the other way. The orphanages get government funding while selling children for profit. The whole system is connected. If I went to the police, they'd just send me back, or worse." He gestured to the space around him. "Down here I'm free. I'm alone, but I'm free. And I've been learning things. Discovering things. Things that could change everything if the right people knew about them." Samuel took a tentative step forward. "What kind of things?" Diego reached for a backpack beside him and pulled out a thick folder stuffed with papers. The tunnels aren't just old subway passages. They were built in the 1950s as part of a civil defense system. bomb shelters, emergency transport routes, secret government facilities. Most people don't even know they exist. He spread some of the papers across the blanket, maps, diagrams, official-looking documents with government seals. But I've also found something else. Evidence that the tunnels have been used for years to transport children between different locations. The factory is just one part of a network. There are at least 4 other facilities connected through this system, and they've been operating for decades. Samuel felt his legs go weak. He sat down on the concrete floor, still maintaining distance from Diego, but too shocked to remain standing. I found rooms down here, Diego continued, sealed chambers that were used as holding areas. I found documents with lists of names, dates, amounts of money. I found photographs. He pulled out a folder and opened it carefully, revealing black and white photographs of children. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all staring at the camera with the same empty expression Samuel had seen on the faces of the children at the factory. These photos go back to the 1960s. This has been happening for a very long time, and no one above ground knows, or no one who knows cares enough to stop it. Samuel stared at the photographs, his hands trembling. Why are you telling me this? Diego met his eyes directly. Because I can't do this alone. I've tried. I've spent 3 years collecting evidence, exploring the tunnels, documenting everything. But I'm just one person. One kid with no family and no credibility. If I tried to expose this by myself, they'd make me disappear before anyone listened. He leaned forward. But 2 of us? 2 witnesses? 2 kids who can describe the factory, the orphanage, the tunnels? 2 sets of evidence? That's harder to ignore. That's harder to silence. Samuel felt something shift inside him. The fear that had dominated his existence for weeks began to transform into something else. Anger. Not the hot, explosive anger of a tantrum, but the cold, focused anger of someone who finally understands how deeply they've been wronged. What do you want me to do? Diego smiled, not with happiness, but with the grim satisfaction of someone who had finally found an ally. I want you to help me map the entire tunnel system. I want you to help me document every piece of evidence. And when we have enough, when we have so much that they can't possibly deny it, I want you to help me bring it all to light. How? I've been researching. There's a journalist in the city, Carmen Reyes. She's investigated government corruption before. She's published stories that got officials arrested. She's the one person I think might actually listen and believe us. Diego pulled out a newspaper clipping, worn from being folded and refolded many times. It was an article about child welfare violations, written by Carmen Reyes. But I need more evidence first. I need to find the central record room. There has to be one, a place where they keep master files on every child who's passed through the system. Financial records, transfer documents, proof of who's involved at the highest levels. Samuel looked around the underground chamber, at the life Diego had built in the darkness, at the determination in his eyes. If we do this, Samuel said slowly, they'll come after us. They'll try to stop us. Yes. We might not survive. We might not. But Samuel, think about all those children in the photos. Think about the ones still working in the factory right now. Think about the ones who will be sold next month, next year. If we don't try to stop this, who will? Samuel thought about the girl at Station 46 who had told him not to talk. He thought about the boy who'd been dragged to the basement and returned with burn marks. He thought about the 3 children who had disappeared from the orphanage before he was taken. He thought about all the invisible children who suffered in silence because the adults who were supposed to protect them had betrayed them for profit. I'll help you, he said. Diego extended his hand. Then we start tomorrow. I'll show you everything I've found. And together, we're going to burn this whole corrupt system to the ground. Samuel shook his hand, feeling the calluses that matched his own. The physical evidence of children forced to work like adults, of innocence stolen and childhood destroyed. But he also felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Purpose. The tunnels had saved his life. Now he was going to use them to save others. Over the following weeks, Samuel's life transformed completely. Diego taught him how to navigate the tunnel system, showing him the safest routes, the areas where ceiling collapses were likely, and the access points that led back to the surface. He explained how to read the infrastructure markings left by the original construction crews, numbers and symbols that indicated direction, depth, and function. They established a routine. During the day, they explored and documented. At night, they returned to the central hub to organize their findings and plan the next day's investigations. Diego had been surviving through careful scavenging. He showed Samuel the locations of access points near supermarkets where expired food was thrown into dumpsters. He knew which public buildings had unlocked basement doors during business hours, allowing them to access bathrooms and occasionally steal supplies. But more importantly, he taught Samuel how to be invisible in the city above. The key, Diego explained, is to look purposeful but not memorable. Keep your head up but not too high. Walk like you know where you're going. Never make eye contact with police or security guards. Carry a backpack so you look like a student. And always have an excuse prepared if someone asks why you're alone. They ventured out only in the early morning or late evening, moving through the city's margins where homeless children and street vendors created a background of poverty that made them blend in perfectly. Diego showed Samuel his network of what he called sympathetic spots, a library where the staff never asked questions about kids who spent all day reading, a church that served free breakfast on Wednesdays, a community center with showers that you could use if you volunteered to sweep the gym afterward. But their primary focus remained the tunnels. Diego had been exploring for 3 years, but the system was so vast that he estimated they'd covered less than 40% of the total network. His maps, drawn on salvage paper and cardboard, showed a sprawling underground labyrinth extending beneath nearly the entire city. The main passages are easy, Diego explained one evening as they studied the maps by lantern light. But there are sealed sections I've never been able to access. Doors that are locked or welded shut. Passages that were deliberately collapsed. Those are the places I think hold the most important evidence. Samuel pointed to one of the maps, where Diego had marked a large X in red ink. What's this? That's the place I've been trying to reach for 6 months. Based on the documents I've found, I think it's the central administrative facility for the entire underground network. If there's a record room with master files, it would be there. Why haven't you gotten there yet? Diego pulled out another map, this one showing a complex series of passages with multiple blockages marked. Because the only route I've found is through the flooded sections. The tunnels near the old water treatment plant. Parts of it are completely underwater, and I don't know how deep or how long the flooded sections extend. I tried to get through once, but the water was over my head and I couldn't see anything. I almost drowned. Samuel studied the map carefully. What if we could drain some of the water, or find diving equipment? I've thought about both options. Draining would require accessing the pump systems, which are probably still controlled from above ground. And diving equipment is expensive. We have no way to get it. Samuel was quiet for a moment. What if there's another route? Something you haven't found yet? Diego smiled. That's exactly what I'm hoping. That's why I need help exploring. 2 sets of eyes. 2 people checking different passages. We might find something I missed. Over the next several weeks, they worked systematically through unexplored sections of the tunnel system. They discovered abandoned maintenance rooms filled with rusted tools and decaying equipment. They found storage chambers containing supplies from decades ago. Canned food so old the labels had completely faded, medical kits with expired medications, even boxes of clothing sized for children. They kept children down here, Diego said quietly as they examined one of these storage rooms. Not just transported them through, actually kept them underground for extended periods. Look at this. He pointed to markings scratched into the concrete walls, names, dates, crew drawings. The desperate evidence of children who had been imprisoned in the darkness. Samuel felt his anger growing with each discovery. This wasn't just criminal neglect. This was systematic, organized cruelty that had operated for generations. They also found evidence of more recent activity. In one section of tunnel near what Diego believed was beneath the factory district, they discovered fresh tire tracks in the accumulated sediment. Large vehicle tracks, suggesting trucks or vans had driven through recently. The tunnels are still being used, Diego said. Not just as routes, but for active transport. We need to be more careful. If we encounter someone down here, they won't hesitate to hurt us. Samuel understood. They increased their caution, always listening for any sound of approaching vehicles or voices, always maintaining multiple escape routes. It was during their 4th week together that they made the discovery that changed everything. They were exploring a section Diego had marked on his maps as Sector 7, unverified. The passage was narrower than the main tunnels, requiring them to walk single file, and the air had a stale quality that suggested poor ventilation. After about 20 minutes of careful navigation, they reached a junction where 3 smaller passages converged. Diego stopped suddenly. Wait, this isn't on any of my maps. He pulled out his notebook and compared it to their surroundings. According to the infrastructure markings, this junction shouldn't exist. The original construction plans showed this area as solid bedrock. Samuel shined his flashlight down each of the 3 passages. So these were added later, after the original construction. Exactly. Which means they were probably added secretly, without official permits or documentation. They chose the middle passage and proceeded cautiously. After about 50 feet, they encountered a door. Not a rusted, ancient door like most of the barriers they'd seen in the tunnels. This was a modern steel door with a mechanical lock and a handle that looked recently used. Diego tried the handle. Locked. We need to get through this, he said. Whatever's behind here is something they're actively trying to hide. Samuel examined the doorframe, looking for weaknesses. The frame was set directly into concrete. No gaps, no visible hinges on this side. We'll need tools. Something to force it. They returned to the central hub, and Diego retrieved a crowbar and a heavy hammer from his collection of scavenged equipment. I've been saving these for something important, he said. I think this qualifies. Back at the door, they worked for nearly an hour, trying to force the lock mechanism without success. The door was too well constructed, too secure. Samuel was about to suggest giving up when Diego noticed something. Look at this. He pointed to a small ventilation grate set into the wall about 10 feet away from the door. That grate is larger than normal. And feel the air. It's flowing toward whatever's behind that door. They managed to remove the grate using the screwdrivers Diego had collected. Behind it was a ventilation duct, narrow but possibly large enough for a small person to crawl through. You're smaller than me, Diego said. If you can get through the duct, you might be able to open the door from the inside. Samuel looked at the dark ventilation shaft and felt his fear rising. The space was claustrophobic, dark, and unknown. But he thought about all the children still trapped in the factory. He thought about the evidence they needed to expose the truth. I'll try. He crawled into the ventilation shaft, using his flashlight to see a few feet ahead. The shaft was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Every few feet, he had to exhale completely to squeeze through tighter sections. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, he reached a vertical drop where the shaft descended about 8 feet before turning horizontal again. He lowered himself carefully, bracing his feet and back against the walls of the shaft. His hands were sweating. His breathing echoed loudly in the confined metal space. At the bottom of the vertical section, he found a grate opening into a room below. He kicked the grate until it fell away, then dropped down into darkness. His flashlight revealed a room unlike anything they'd seen in the tunnels. It was a functional office space. Recent. Clean. There were filing cabinets against one wall. A desk with a computer, not connected to power, but present. Chairs. A water cooler. Even a small refrigerator. And on the walls were maps. Detailed, professional maps showing the entire tunnel system, with locations marked in different colors. Red marks indicated the factory and several other buildings Samuel didn't recognize. Blue marks showed what appeared to be access points throughout the city. Green marks highlighted specific chambers and rooms within the tunnel network. Samuel walked slowly around the office, his mind racing. This was the command center, the place where the entire operation was coordinated. He found the door and unlocked it from the inside, letting Diego enter. For several moments, they both stood in silence, taking in the evidence surrounding them. "This is it," Diego whispered. "This is what we needed." They spent the next 3 hours methodically documenting everything. Diego photographed every map, every document, every piece of evidence using a disposable camera he'd been saving for exactly this moment. Samuel focused on the filing cabinets. They were organized by year, going back to 1963. Each folder contained records of children, names, ages, orphanage of origin, destination facility, price paid. The scale of the operation was staggering. Thousands of children, dozens of facilities, millions of pesos in illegal transactions. But what made Samuel's blood run cold were the names he recognized. The 3 children who had disappeared from the Santa Teresa orphanage before him were all documented here. Their destinations, their prices, their fates. And there were sections for different types of placements: agricultural labor, domestic service, industrial work, and categories with codes instead of names, categories that Diego explained in a horrified whisper meant something far worse than labor. "We have to get this out," Samuel said. "All of it, every piece of evidence." Diego nodded. "But we can't just take the documents. If they notice files are missing, they'll know someone was here. They'll increase security, destroy evidence, maybe even evacuate the entire operation." "So what do we do?" Diego thought carefully. "We photograph everything. We create a complete copy of all the records. And then we leave everything exactly as we found it. When the journalist comes to investigate, the evidence will still be here for official authorities to find." They worked through the night, photographing hundreds of documents. By dawn, they had created a comprehensive record of the entire operation. But as they prepared to leave, Samuel noticed something they'd almost missed: a locked drawer in the desk. Using the tools they'd brought, they forced it open. Inside was a single folder marked Authorities, Paid Protection. The folder contained a list of names: police officers, judges, social workers, government officials. Each name had a monthly amount listed beside it, the price of their silence. "This is why no one stops them," Diego said quietly. "The corruption goes all the way up." Samuel photographed the list carefully, making sure every name was clearly visible. As they left the office and locked the door behind them, Diego turned to Samuel. "This changes everything. We're not just exposing criminals anymore. We're exposing government corruption at the highest levels. People with power. People who will do anything to protect their secrets." "Are you scared?" Diego smiled grimly, terrified, but also more certain than ever that we have to do this. Because if we don't, who will? They returned to the central hub as the city above was waking up. They had the evidence. They had the proof. Now they needed to get it to someone who could use it without being silenced. "Tomorrow," Diego said, "we contact the journalist. We tell her what we found, and we ask her to meet us." Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. They were 2 children, powerless, invisible, forgotten by society. But they were about to become the most dangerous witnesses in the city. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He lay on his blanket in the central hub, listening to Diego's steady breathing, thinking about all the children whose names filled those files. Tomorrow, their silence would end. Tomorrow, the truth would begin its journey to the surface. And somewhere in the darkness of the tunnels, in the cold concrete chambers where so many children had suffered, Samuel felt the presence of all those invisible victims, waiting, hoping that someone would finally speak for them. The voice that had called his name in the darkness had led him to purpose. Now his voice would call out the names of the guilty, and the city above would finally have to listen.